It's funny what you learn about someone after they die. It started at my father's funeral. An old friend of his, John Fonseca, told a story about how when he was a young man, my father stole his neighbour's motorbike and rode it through the night to attend a cricket match. My father stole a motorbike. I didn't even know he could ride one. This story seemed so utterly unlike him, I couldn't make sense of it. To me, my father was a shy, withdrawn man. He liked old novels and the BBC World Service, and he kept his thoughts to himself, like a bottle with its stopper pushed in tight. He wasn't the sort to go out adventuring at night. Or was he? I didn't see my father much when I was growing up. I was born here, in Sri Lanka, where he helped to manage a tea estate. But when my parents' marriage fell apart, my mother moved back to England with the children. I was 8 at the time. After that, we saw him only occasionally. And when we did see him, it was as though he was so distant, he was trying to hide his true self from us. I remember 5 years ago, I went to see him, to tell him I was going to propose to my wife. I had the ring in my pocket to show him. "Dad," I said, "I'm going to propose to Katie." He said, "Good luck." And he left it at that, his countless unsaid words hanging like a mist between us. I left the room with the ring still in my pocket. Yet at the funeral, I heard how he used to entertain rooms full of people with stories and jokes. His friends all called him Francis, and for a while I kept forgetting that this Francis and my father were the same person. I never called him Francis. At home he was your father. To me, he was Dad. Who was this Francis? I started to think I never knew him at all. This idea, this not knowing, obsessed me. I bored my friends, I pestered my family. In the end, I decided to move out here to the old tea estate where he lived until he retired to England. It's a beautiful country, you know, rolling green hills, dirt paths snaking upon them, here and there sunlight glinting off the roofs of cottages. I'm here in his old house, the red-roofed bungalow that now has mould in the woodwork and holes in the floor. I brought his ashes too. I thought I could scatter them here. I don't know what I expected to find. Some answers, perhaps. Well, I found more questions. I went to stay with the family of his second wife last week. They have a beautiful house down by the coast. It smells of cinnamon, and at night you can hear dogs barking outside your window and the suck and flow of the Indian Ocean. His sister-in-law said, "He was the kindest man I ever knew. He used to invite all the children from the village to his garden, and he would give the girls 1 rupee for every beetle they plucked from his flower bed. He set up a wicket and taught the boys how to bowl, and once a year he organised a pantomime. It was so popular, even the newspapers came to photograph it. He was such a kind man, your father." These were lovely memories, but they made me sad somehow. If he was such a kind man, why was he such a distant father? I tracked down some of his friends. Douglas De Silva was the first man he got to know when he moved out here. He lives in a suburb of Colombo with a room full of cats and his housekeeper. "By Jove, you're the spitting image," he said when I found him one morning. He was sitting by the window, reading a newspaper and wearing a white sarong. I asked him about the motorbike story and he laughed. "Yes, I remember that one, but that wasn't half what we did in those days. I remember your father and I once blundered into the engine room of an intercity train. I said, 'I'm under orders from General so-and-so, we're in charge now.' And he said, 'I am General so-and-so, stop this train at once.'" And he laughed for about 5 minutes. "We did it so our friend Arthur could jump in a 3-wheeler and catch us up at the next crossing. We were going to a party and didn't want him to miss out." I asked Douglas how he and my father found the courage for such a charade, and he mimed that they'd been drinking. My father, the rogue, the mischief maker. This was not the man I knew. Some of my family didn't want me to come here. When my sister realized she couldn't talk me out of it, she wrote me a letter and put it in my suitcase to read when I arrived. It was very hard to read. She is 6 years older than me and remembers far better the events leading up to the divorce, that wrench that opened up the abyss between us and him. I thought that my memory of that time was hazy, but as I read her careful, curling letters on the page, I started to recall things too. My father has locked himself in his tool shed. An hour ago he had a blazing row with my mother. Now everyone in the house, the children, the pets, even the staff, are trying to hide themselves against the furniture. Damn her, he says. He is brooding, allowing his anger to rise and it starts to seethe. He clenches his teeth. It's as though there's the timer of a bomb in his head going tick, 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 tick. Silence. Then he erupts out of the room and stalks through the home, tearing pictures off the wall, smashing things. Where are you? He cries. Don't hide from me. He finds my mother in a hallway. He pushes her against the wall. He puts one hand around her neck, and in the other he brandishes a cast iron fireplace poker he has seized in a moment of madness, as if he wishes to break her skull. My sister says she cannot forgive him for this. That's why she didn't come to the funeral. You know, it may seem strange, but it is only now that he's dead that I realized my father was an alcoholic. I think that as he aged, he learned a kind of discretion that was so expertly secretive, he probably hid his disease even from himself. Of course, his friends knew, but at a distance, the drunk is a bon viveur, the unpredictable life of the party. No wonder everyone had a story about him. But where were they when he was 2 days into a 3-day binge, taking his revolver out of his drawer, putting it up to his temple, threatening to blow his brains out if his wife didn't tell him where she'd hidden the children? I used to think my father saw himself as a sort of King Lear, the monarch deserted and betrayed by his children. We seldom called, we never visited. I thought he resented us. Only now do I realize the emotion he felt above all others was guilt. And yet, now I'm the guilty one. My sister saw too much to forgive, but I was too young, too oblivious. He could have looked me in the eyes and said, "Son, I'm sorry." And I would have embraced him. I would have forgiven it all. But I never let him say it. And now he never will say it. I came to Sri Lanka looking for answers for the final chapter of the story, those neat closing paragraphs that would explain for all time who he was. But that's futile. How can you sum up something as fractured and crooked as a human life? I choose to remember him like this. Before he was married, before he had children, before his drinking became the self-destructive thing it was, he goes out in the middle of the night and steps down onto a motorbike he does not own. Tires crunch over gravel, then hiccup over a rutted road. Soon he is streaking down the highway, the road disappearing underneath him, the wind whispering through the palm trees, the air rushing past his face, with nothing to hold him back but the limits of his own dreams. That's how I choose to remember him. Farewell, Francis. Goodbye, Dad.